Episode 1 of Silo Season 1 begins with a man named Holston pinning his sheriff badge to his shirt and walking out his room. He emerges into the giant base for which numerous people are living. They're inside a great silo, but all the residents are in the dark over what their purpose is and what they're actually doing here. They don't know when it will be safe to venture outside either, but one thing's for sure, it's definitely not right now. As Sheriff Holston heads into Holding 3 and looks outside the window. He locks the door and throws the keys outside, telling Morris that he really wants to go outside to meet his beloved. For now, he's locked himself up, and as the deputy shows, Holston tells him he wants to venture outside. We then cut back in time to see Holston with his partner Allison. They're trying for a baby and things are looking good. It's their third and final time of trying, given Allison is now 38. She has her birth control implant removed by the doctor, and the pair prepare for what's to come. At dinner, an old woman called Gloria shows up and urges Allison to come and see her. Holston is not happy with this, pointing out that she's a fraud as Gloria has a reputation for making her subjects do whatever she wants, promising them the world for nothing in return. This soon subsides as the days pass and the pair continue to try and get pregnant. Allison actually works as a reporter, and whilst there she's reprimanded by her boss Bernard. Allison has been breaking the rules and she's called out for it. She's been asking questions about the rebels and the before times. They have the pact in place which forbids questions like this, and Sheriff Holston is not happy with the way this conversation is going. After all, it's his job to make sure the doors stay firmly shut so whatever is outside doesn't get in. As for Allison, she's confronted by Gloria, who speaks to her in private. She runs a tap to make sure the judicial team can't hear, as she goes on to point out what's happening outside. She knows that Allison is someone that wonders. Gloria questions whether the authorities actually want her to get pregnant, hinting at some sort of conspiracy theory at work. Allison and Holston continue to try and get pregnant regardless, even having sex at the work desk. Now while this simmers away in the background, Allison meets George Wilkins, who happens to be a repair guy. He's printed out her post online and is operating in the shadows to avoid the gaze of the judicial team. He's been trying to retrieve an old drive that's over 140 years old. Given they've been told that all of them were destroyed, this throws their entire history and what they've been told into disarray. While the pair work, everyone else celebrates their Freedom Day, with big banners up and all the members of the silo gathered to greet the judicial and cheer. The mayor gives a rousing speech about remembering the terror of the rebellion and how they destroyed everything, including all the books and the computer drives. As she speaks, we cut back to Allison and George, who both find plans for the silo blueprints on this drive. Allison loses her nerve, believing this is a relic and it's forbidden to have it, and tells George that he needs to destroy it. Allison heads back to see Gloria, becoming ever more disillusioned with what's happening inside the silo. In fact, she decides to finally see everything, moving between Gloria and George to understand what may be hidden from them. The final file with the latter happens to be a video that could change everything. A cleaner called Jane is outside the silo, and her video footage shows birds flying outside. As a result of this, Allison drifts further away from Holston. She tells him that night that she's not okay, but she will be. Unfortunately, their year of potential baby making comes and goes, but Allison doesn't show up at the clinic for their meeting about the baby. Allison is actually back home, and with the tap running, she confronts Holston about what she's found out. She was going to talk to him the night before, but needed proof to confirm the enforcers were never going to let them have kids. It turns out her birth control was never taken out, evidenced by a bloody knife and the actual implant on the table. Holston realises his wife has cut herself open, and he races off to get help for her. However, Allison isn't in their cabin anymore. She's actually in the cafeteria. She makes a big scene and tries to convince everyone that they need to listen. When they don't, she tells everyone inside the silo that she wants to go outside. This is a crime inside the silo, as evidenced earlier, and she's taken away in handcuffs. Unfortunately, both George Wilkins and Gloria are both questioned too, as a result of Allison's ties with them. Holston believes that the stress of not having a baby has deterred her, and that's why she's acting this way. Well, Allison is completely lucid and understands what's happening. She believes that the images inside the silo have been distorted and changed to stop them from going out. But why? Well, Allison is determined to find out. Alison is strapped up and ready to go outside, and she's to clean the exterior of the silo and convinced that she's not going to die. This is hard for Holston to take though, who's convinced that she will. He does his job and reads out the oath, confirming that inside is safe and the outside is not. Afterwards, Alison tells him she loves him and prepares to take the walk outside. This happens to be directly opposite the cell, and Holston eventually presses the button and lets the large door shut, keeping Alison out the silo. On the alleged window inside the cafeteria, Alison steps up and looks around. She makes it to the window and begins cleaning. With the view clearer than before, Alison walks away from the silo. Only in doing so, she winds up collapsing, crawling toward the remnants of an old tree in the distance. It seems like she's dead. We then jump forward 2 years later. Holston's whole world has fallen apart, while George Wilkins has been transferred to mechanical a year back, but he's now shown up dead, which is a bit suspicious. There's an engineer down here who's convinced that it's murder. The woman down there, Juliet Nichols, is someone whom Holston has been in contact with for a while, which we learn as narration cuts us back to the present timeline, where Holston is determined to find out the truth. Episode 2 of Silo Season 1 begins with Holston prepared to head outside. Once out the airlock, he's away from the law. He makes a long climb up the stairs ready for whatever may lay outside. And everyone joins together in the cafeteria to see Holston emerge from underground and into the wasteland beyond. "Damn it, Alison, you were right," Holston says, as it seems like outside actually is this beautiful paradisiac area. He cleans the lens on the camera so those in the silo can see and heads towards the tree, which is beautiful and idyllic. But there's something wrong. He starts to choke and eventually collapses on the ground. Nobody has taken their helmet off before, so Holston is the first to do so, and he begins crawling toward Alison's body, where he collapses and seems to die. Juliet is livid and takes off, shouting he's a liar. She heads down to engineering and tries to keep herself in check, but within her rage she throws something and bursts one of the pipes, sending a stream of fresh water across the room. With the sheriff gone, the attention turns to who will pick up the mantle and take over now. They're up to Sheriff number 97, and with the sparks of rebellion rumbling in the streets, given the lack of law and order right now, things don't look good. In fact, an opportunist called Sims shows up and begins organising traffic. It's been 3 months since George died during our timeline this episode, which cuts us back in time. Juliet is convinced that he was murdered, and he wanted to show Juliet something before he died, which includes a letter and a Pez dispenser, which seems to hint at something more. When George doesn't show up in her bunk, news of his death spreads. This catches us up to the moments from last episode, as Holston shows to question Juliet about George's death. He seems to have fallen 100 feet, and there's no witnesses here, given it occurred at 3 AM. Suicide is apparently a crime within the silo, but Juliet is convinced that he wouldn't have killed himself. She confides in Holston and tells him as much, even going on to mention that George has left something for her. She doesn't want him to rat her out regarding this relic, so Holston agrees to bend the truth a little and claim that he just found it, rather than the truth where he got it from her. Juliet shows that the letter reads "Remember when you last saw this," which is a message only Juliet can decipher. It's to do with the Pez dispenser, and she leads Holston into a secret area, hidden behind a large sign and down a hidden tunnel. With a torch in hand, they continue until the bottom of the stairs, where they come to a large open area. There, Juliet shows off the remnants of a huge, spidery digger robot. Apologies for the lack of a technical term here. Anyway, this thing is just a husk now, given all the precious materials that have been stripped and taken off it. However, it's enough to open Holston's eyes to a whole world that's been hidden in plain sight. The pair arrive at a makeshift camp down here, which happens to be the location George hinted at with the letter. These are all relics from the old world, including a camcorder that Juliet is struggling to turn on. Turns out George sold and traded relics in his spare time. Juliet notices something different this time, which happens to be a piece of string that tracks all the way across to a suspended piece of steel. Attached on the end happens to be a bag holding even more relics. There's instructions on recovering deleted files, with Alison's handwriting on the back. There's also the computer drive too, but Holston reminds her that asking questions is dangerous. Now, part of Holston's interest here comes from Juliet's connection to George, and in particular his ties with Alison. His wife was never afraid and, in a way, Holston sees some of his wife in Juliet. He tells her to stop wearing the watch as it draws attention, and he promises to keep looking into this in secret and figure out what the truth may be. But back in the present, Deputy Marnes happens to have a letter from Holston, which happens to be his final letter. He recommends Juliet Nichols to take over his role, along with taking on all his personal belongings too. Now, given Juliet was waiting for a sign, this could well be an indication as to what he meant, so she can take over his role. As for Juliet, her little outburst about calling Holston a liar is linked to him not giving her a sign and helping to find out what happened to George. Given George was driven to find out the truth, that role has now turned to Juliet to take over. And as the episode closes out, Juliet drops a whole load of rope down that suspended steel beam and intends to rappel down, believing it could hold a clue to what's happening within the silo. Episode 3 of Silo begins with Juliet in the depths of the silo, dropping down her rope to the large, dingy water below. Breathing heavily, she clings to a rope and eventually ascends again, her search fruitless. There's nothing down there. It does, however, spill out her emotions and she begins drinking, trying to wash away the bitter memories of George's death. In the morning, Juliet struggles to get up with her alarm ringing in her ear. Her door is wide open and a fellow engineer shows, asking her questions. Before they have to answer, a distinct rumbling snaps Juliet out of her half-drunk stupor. She races down to engineering where she immediately smacks a kid called Cooper in the face, who's investigating the generator and takes charge of the situation. Juliet is pulled into a meeting with the head of engineering, who tries to work out exactly what she's doing. After punching Cooper, he tells her she's to take the day off and sober up. He reminds her she should be grateful that he's not sending her to the trash line or doing any other menial, unpleasant job after her outburst. The deputy meets the mayor and the pair head down to Judicial together, only they hesitate at the door. Mayor Ruth has a rather tenuous relationship with Judge Meadows, so Ruth heads deeper down the silo where he runs into Bernard. He's been crunching the numbers and warns that without a sheriff watching over everything, the likelihood of big riots and citizens arming themselves is increasing every second. And Mayor Ruth steps up her investigation into Juliet's candidacy, this time turning toward Juliet's father, who happens to be one of the doctors down in the lower levels. He points out that Juliet has had massive interest in machines from an early age, but to be honest, he doesn't tell them much more. As Ruth herself says, more questions than answers. Ruth is unsure exactly why she's been recommended by Holston to take over his role, but the mayor tries to figure that out this episode. While sitting and eating together, the deputy and mayor are interrupted by Sims, who shows up with a fresh strawberry dessert. And it seems like he may be working under Judge Meadow. He pitches Ruth the name of Paul Billings, who is apparently the perfect guy for the sheriff role, but Ruth is not deterred and promises to make her choice when she's ready. Having sobered up, Juliet remains dedicated to fixing the generator and keeping the silo running. This also gets Ruth thinking as she visits Martha, the woman down in the workshop that's been there for 20 years. He wants to know exactly who Juliet is and whether she can be trusted. Martha puts in a good word for her colleague and it seems to convince Ruth, who similarly believes Juliet should take on the role. When she asks Juliet to take this on though, she outright declines, pointing out that a generator is not well and she needs to try and fix it. Despite her rejection, the mayor does hand over Holston's old sheriff badge, telling her Holston wanted her to have this regardless. There seems to be something carved on the back of the badge, but we don't see what that is until the end of the episode. For now, Juliet changes her mind and agrees to take on the role, but it comes with a catch. She needs to fix the generator first and warns that they need to turn it off completely in order to do that. She's confident she can repair it, but it will mean that there will be an 8-hour period of blackout. Mayor Ruth is worried that this could cause people to panic, but agrees all the same. Down in Mechanical, the engineers discuss what this really means, given it could actually blow up should they keep the generator off for too long. The slightest mistake could leave everyone in the dark forever, or even kill someone. Ruth and the deputy turn their attention to the maintenance of the silo itself, agreeing to keep watch of the gun cabinet and make sure it's completely safe. The generator is turned off and Juliet works with Cooper to try and fix the issue. They have very limited time to try and get this generator up and running again, and Juliet heads deep into the depths of the generator when they start to get warning lights, blasting it with cold water to try and cool the machine down. They eventually get Juliet out, everything is put back the way it was, and the generator is turned back on. Thanks to Juliet's bravery and a team working in tandem, they all manage to get the generator going and it works an absolute treat. While everyone cheers, Juliet's victory is hollow given she knows how close they came to annihilation. She's also saddened by the fact she's got to make good on her promise too, with her shipped off to become sheriff. Juliet says her goodbyes to Martha, apologising for her earlier outburst. Higher up in the silo, Bernard returns and knows that Juliet is going to be selected as sheriff, and he's not particularly happy with the mayor. He believes Juliet is not fit for office, given she's proven to be a thief after taking some tape that didn't belong to her. He gives a thinly veiled threat. So what's on Holston's badge? Well, just before Juliet leaves engineering, she flips it over to reveal one word: truth. And as the episode closes out, we flip back to Mayor Ruth one more time, who looks under the weather. She walks away from the deputy, suddenly collapses on the floor, and begins convulsing and bleeding from the mouth. As the deputy screams for help, the episode comes to a close. Episode 4 of Silo Season 1 begins with Juliet called up to the mayor's office. This is, of course, about Ruth, and it turns out she's dead. Deputy Marnes is shocked and he speaks to Bernard and Sims, believing that she's been spiked with rat poison. Ruth wasn't the target though, as we soon learn, as it seems like Marn was the one intending to be killed. If Ruth hadn't drunk from his bottle, perhaps she'd still be alive, and the deputy is torn up over this fact. Bernard is actually sworn in to be the interim mayor for the time being, and that also means that he'll be swearing in Juliet as a sheriff too. She's eventually shown over to the sheriff's office, but her assistant Sandy does not make life easy for her. There's prejudices against those in the bottom 50 levels, but Juliet gives as good as she gets. She wants access to files in the gun cabinet, but Sandy is loath to hand those over until she's been sworn in officially. Juliet concedes and points out she only wants one file, that being George Wilkins. Right now, she just wants the file. That doesn't stop her from looking around herself though, and her search brings her over to Holding 3, the infamous area that leads up to the surface. Interspersed around this are flashbacks showing more of Juliet's history with her father. Her brother Jacob is not in a good state, and despite surviving an initial scare, it seems from the sequence that he didn't make it, and neither did her mum either. Juliet heads down to recycling alone and drops off a lot of gear from her apartment, although the friendly man there encourages her to keep hold of Jacob's favourite toy. Juliet has always had a fascination with fixing things, but while fixing up a chair, she tries to make some food and ends up causing the alarms to go off. She falls out with her dad when he returns, and Juliet blames him for what's happened. "Not everything can be fixed," he replies. Juliet ends up down with Martha and the others in the bottom 50 levels, where she learns her trade. Part of this includes sorting the recycling and working hard, long hours for the good of the silo. Juliet's forged letter inevitably brings her father down, but he decides that she can stay as long as she's happy. Back in the present, Bernard swears in Juliet as sheriff officially before she heads back to the office. Sandy returns not long after and tells her that there is no file for George Wilkins. However, Holston did leave behind a file for whoever got the job. This happens to include a handwritten note and a cryptic clue. Before Juliet can look into this though, Deputy Marnes ends up in a sticky situation down in the market as he begins smacking around a guy called Frankie, believing he's the one with the poison. Deputy Marnes is frustrated that no one else is taking the Ruth murder seriously, and it's enough for Juliet to actually open up to him about what she's been doing. She points out exactly what she told Holston about George's murder and was told to wait for a sign. She believes it's the sheriff badge reading truth, and in exchange for figuring out what happened to Ruth, Juliet wants Marnes to help find out who murdered George. The pair end up in a tenuous agreement. Down in Martha's lab, Martha manages to fix up the camcorder that Juliet was messing about with last episode. However, we don't see the outcome of that. Instead, we cut back to Juliet in her office as she decides to look at the rattling in the vents. This is something Bernard mentioned earlier too, and it's perhaps a good thing she didn't agree to let someone else take a look. She brings the rattling chain out, which is linked to a bag full of papers. It happens to be the George Wilkins file. As the episode closes out, we jump to Deputy Marnes one more time. It's after hours and he's drunk, and there's an indication that he might drop his bottle off the edge of the silo to the depths below. He thinks twice about that and instead heads back to his apartment, but unfortunately he's suddenly attacked by someone who holds him up at gunpoint. Episode 5 of Silo begins with Juliet looking through George's file. There are transcripts of his conversation with the police, along with various documents, but nothing untoward at first glance. Juliet is unsure why Holston has hidden all of this. However, she's distracted by news filtering in of Deputy Marnes' death. His body isn't even cold, and Sims is there to announce that there's a new deputy sheriff in Paul Billings who's coming in to fill the spot. He's the guy whom Bernard and Sims wanted to take Juliet's position originally, so naturally there's a level of distrust there. When Juliet checks over Marnes' body, she finds a slip of paper with Doris circled. After taking it, believing it to be another clue that links back to earlier episodes, she heads back to the management group, which now comprises of Sims, Paul and Bernard, with the latter deciding that they should do a double funeral for both Marnes and Jans. Bernard deduces that they can spin the story of them being forbidden lovers, but Bernard also believes a race to the top could be a good way of celebrating Ruth's tenure as mayor, despite her ironically hating this idea while in office. The funeral goes ahead with each person taking a bite of an apple in its makeshift orchard and throwing it in alongside the bodies. When Juliet returns to her office, she finds Hank staring at the Holding 3 door. He got an invite to the burial, but he decided not to go with everyone else. Martha and Shirley sent him up to check on Juliet and make sure she's okay. She confirms to him that she is, but Sandy comes up with a proposition. She'll help Juliet get what she wants in exchange for figuring out who killed Marnes. And not via the official channels either. Sandy knows how things work here and warns that things could get disorderly quickly, especially because it would involve getting Billings in and framing some poor innocent guy for these murders. Juliet and Billings head out to try and get some answers, and after speaking to Charles Martin, Juliet ditches Billings and heads back to see Patrick Kennedy. As we know, Doris was his wife before she passed away, and there's no love lost between him and Marnes. With the sheriff badge in hand, Juliet breaks in and decides to look around. While we don't see this on screen, we do learn later that there's planted evidence in his place. As a result, Juliet decides to find Patrick and put him somewhere safe. Billings returns to the Judicial rather than heading home for lunch, where he finds a guy called Doug is working to be Sims' shadow. The chatter is cryptic, but Billings does return to Juliet and admit to where he's been. Apparently Judicial get reports from people who don't officially exist, but they've come up with a name, suggesting Ralph Melby is the guy whom they're looking at to arrest. Now all of this is an elaborate ruse to oust Juliet as a disgrace, having arrested the wrong guy, while the planted evidence in Kennedy's apartment would be found and then him declared the killer. Juliet would then be sent back to Mechanical and things would return to the status quo. Juliet nods thoughtfully, then decides to arrest Kennedy instead. Juliet returns and finds Doug outside the building, wanting to try and get in. Juliet susses out that he's the man responsible for planting evidence, and she gives chase through the silo. Unfortunately, that's easier said than done, given it occurs right in the midst of this race to the top. Doug and Juliet spiral down until the latter ends up hanging on for dear life. She manages to stop Doug, breaking his finger in the process. Juliet is thankfully saved, and she returns to her office. Doug returns to Sims, with the latter deciding that he's going to be his shadow from this moment forward. He knows the guy has made a lot of mistakes, especially with George Wilkins and now Marnes. After reciting the words, Sims pushes Doug off the edge of the silo. Juliet heads to see Judge Meadows with news of what's occurred between Marnes and Jans, including how Doug was on the run and took his own life with his arrest imminent. Meadows is incredulous over this, but realises it will quell the conspiracy theories and should be enough to put the issue to bed for good. Back at the office, Juliet learns that Sandy has been reassigned voluntarily so she can be closer to her family. She actually didn't know that Juliet would solve the Marnes' murder so quickly, if at all, but she gives a surprise compliment to Juliet for her good work. Sandy also points out that she's glad to be going back down, given she feels she's being watched. Juliet heads back to see Martha that night to catch up, because she knows Juliet was hanging from the railing earlier on and urges her to speak up. Juliet won't, wanting to protect her, but she does point out that there's nothing in the Wilkins file. Martha also points out that there are two big mysteries regarding the pact. First of all, they stipulate that one can't mechanise the way they go up and down in the silo, and two, there's no magnification beyond a certain power. Juliet believes that she's managed to gain Bernard's trust after solving these two murders and wants to use judicial and management to figure out what happened to George Wilkins properly. In order to do that, she needs to use the right bait, and that comes from the Pez dispenser. Episode 6 of Silo starts with Juliet breaking into Trumbull's apartment, determined to find anything that may lead to why he killed Marnes. But of course we know this is one big ruse. She's joined by her new Deputy Chief Billings, who finds a Pez dispenser, the one that Juliet planted ahead of time. A further flashback shows Juliet and George's intimate relationship, and it soon becomes obvious as to what's fueling Juliet's desire to find out what happened to him, and figure out what other secrets the Silo may be hiding. As Juliet fixes up George's watch in these flashbacks too, as Juliet explains that she did so because it makes her feel good to know that he's feeling good. This also helps to shed light on why she's so adamant about wearing the watch and keeping it with her at all times. In the office, Juliet searches the archives to try and find evidence of the Pez dispenser. However, Billings shows and he's pretty jittery, explaining to Juliet that keeping a relic beyond its 12-hour period and not handing it over to Judicial is a serious crime. Juliet does eventually head over to Judicial, where she's reacquainted with the judge. She brings up the relic and uses this as a way of trying to broach the subject of opening a new investigation into relics that haven't yet been documented. Sims agrees, but under the pretense that Paul joins her through the whole investigation. And outside the office, Billings warns that Judicial are going to be watching Juliet like a hawk as a result of this, so she needs to be careful. As for Sims, he pores over the relic and begins looking through the archives himself, which includes a large locked safe with numerous red bags and a whole bunch of folders. Billings and Juliet show up to see Regina Jackson, who recognises George Wilkins' watch. She claims it belonged to her boyfriend, and when she finds out George is dead, she's not particularly torn up about it and is more interested in the watch. Regina explains that her relationship to George wasn't sanctioned, but she's wiped her hands off this, pointing out that George has a good way with words and went down to mechanical to explore the big questions. Just before they leave, Regina hits one more proverbial dart to the chest, asking Juliet if she believes George when he told her he loved her. It throws everything Juliet knew about the man into question, and she begins doubting herself as a result. Bernard and Sims confront Juliet about the relic thereafter and want answers. They point out that this relic belongs to George Wilkins, and they did a thorough search of his place before he died and found nothing. It seems a bit suspect that this dispenser would just inexplicably show up in Trumbull's apartment. They indirectly accuse Juliet of planting evidence, something we know they're not above doing themselves, but Bernard actually stands up for Juliet, pointing out that Trumbull may have taken the relic for himself, especially if he was part of the search team. Bernard shrugs it off in the end, deciding to leave the mystery unsolved, but does give a side-eyed glance to Juliet when he leaves, seemingly believing that he's covering for her. Billings is not happy at the quickness Juliet would throw him under the bus, given his name was immediately brought up in the conversation regarding the relic. Billings wants Juliet to trust him, pointing out that he has a family and could have been sent to clean outside because of her carelessness. Juliet heads back to see Regina that night, who points out there's more going on here than Juliet knows. Judicial come during the day and ask the easy questions, but the man who knows everything comes at night. Turning on the fan to mask her voice, Regina brings up how Judicial know exactly what's going on, and this shadowy figure actually recited all the names of people she'd spoken to each day. Scaring her half to death, Regina gave up all the names for relic dealers she knew to save her mother and protect her family. And that included George Wilkins too, connecting all of this together. Juliet asks about the hard drive when Regina brings it up casually, but despite not seeing it, she admits she exchanged the hard drive for a relic that predates the rebellion. In fact, this is so ancient and secret that if she reveals what's inside this envelope to anyone else, it will inevitably get her killed. Hurriedly heading back to her apartment, Juliet opens a package to find a book called The Amazing Adventures of Georgia. Inside happened to be a whole bunch of incredible sights on offer, and it's signed by everyone that this book has been passed down to over time. However, as the camera zooms out, we see that someone in the control room is watching all of this unfold on a whole bunch of monitors. He turns to his partner and tells him to wake him up to see this. Episode 7 of Silo starts with us seeing Gloria again, who happens to be by the beach fingering a shell while reminiscing on old memories with her family. Gloria is soon thrust back into reality as she ends up in her bedroom with a nurse by her side, who injects her with a serum that sedates her. Juliet notices all the different names that have signed the book, including George and, interestingly, Gloria. She's still unaware that she's being watched, but she does notice that the Gloria file was with her, so she scoops it up and decides to leave. As she does, this boss shows up in a security centre. And who is that? Well, it turns out to be Sims. This is all within the silo after all. Juliet heads back to her office and decides to run a search on Gloria. Well, it turns out she's in long-term care. Paul Billings rocks up not long after and reveals that she has messages. The mayor, Bernard obviously, also wants a meeting, but Juliet shrugs it off, deciding to reschedule instead. Juliet heads down to long-term care and, as sheriff, discovers Gloria's whereabouts. She's completely out of it, but Juliet wants to take her out for a walk. Unfortunately, Judge Meadows has an order to keep her there. Juliet doesn't care about protocol and decides to wait for her regardless. However, she's apparently in her room because she's sick. In the wake of this, there's big drama down on one of the floors as a big fight breaks out. It's absolute chaos, and without the sheriff around, Billings has trouble containing the situation. It turns out a bar on floor 26 was trashed that previous night, which seems to be a group from the mids. Billings is livid when he feeds his back to Juliet, pointing out that the people are scared and jittery, and they need their sheriff to keep things stable. Billings points out that he actually lied for her and could lose his job for doing so. It's enough for Juliet to open up and reveal that what she's really doing here is searching for the truth around the murders. She's also conflicted because Wilkins lied to her this whole time. Billings decides to let Juliet investigate this and keep everything under wraps, but similarly tells her she needs to stop neglecting her duties and meet with the mayor. As one last act of help, Billings also reveals that the judge lives on level 15 in the manager's row. She has breakfast delivered every morning, which gives Juliet a solid way in. Juliet meets with the mayor in the morning, who has big news. It turns out he's received a threat from Judge Meadows, and he believes that Meadows may actually be in the process of hijacking the servers, given this would give her a way to ultimately control the silo. Bernard wants Juliet to help, but when he finds out that Billings is helping, he's quick to remind her that Paul Billings is her replacement and not her sidekick. Juliet shows up as scheduled at Meadows' door, wanting answers over what's happening down in long-term care. Juliet demands she lift the order, and if she does that, then Juliet will hand in her badge at the end of the week. However, Meadows points out that she can't do that, and it's literally not possible as they won't allow it. Juliet realises at this point that Meadows is just another cog in a hidden system of control, and she leaves empty-handed. Juliet heads down to see her father in the midst of this and asks for a favour. She wants him to help get Gloria out, and also to flush her system free of drugs. It's a dangerous play, of course, but she does manage to convince her dad to pull through for her. It's definitely touch and go for a while, as Juliet manages to get him to wheel Gloria out and into a secure nursery that's not being watched or bugged. There is a reversing agent to help flush out the sedatives quicker than the allotted 5 or 6 hours, but there's also side effects to this too. Still, it's worth a shot to get some answers. Gloria starts to have a seizure, bringing back awful memories of Juliet's past. Thankfully, they both manage to get Gloria through this in one piece, however they still need to wait. As they twiddle their thumbs and hope things pass quickly, Sims heads down into janitorial, which happens to hold the secret room leading down into the security consoles. They've called Sims down because they have no idea where Juliet is, but Sims organises traffic and orders the group to try and find Juliet. When Gloria comes around, she realises that Juliet's father is one of them, part of the group of doctors that experimented on her and stopped her from having a baby. Juliet ushers her father out, knowing that he's upsetting Gloria. Alone, Juliet hands over George's book. Apparently George's mum was one of them, one of the Flamekeepers. These folks are being erased, and the Flamekeepers are actually a colloquial term for the rebels fighting back against the silo. The silo is run by authorities, and the Flamekeepers are just trying to put their flame out. The silo wanted the rebels to die off, and the doctors all knew about this and were in on it from the start. When Gloria brings up George Wilkins, Juliet unfortunately breaks the news that he was murdered a year back, but it was made out to be an accident. Gloria recognises Juliet after holding one of the babes in the nursery and points out that her mother could have been a flame keeper, and although she wasn't, she did possess that same curiosity. When Gloria is taken back to long-term care, Juliet confronts her father about the cruelty behind the fertility and tricking women. Juliet is absolutely livid, but she plays her role well as she claims that Gloria was out wandering about when she head into long-term care and finds an orderly there. Interestingly, Sims picks her up on the screens here and is none the wiser by this point over where she's been. Before Juliet says her goodbyes, she does hand over the book and lets Gloria look at the beach one more time. Apparently Holston came to see her a few years back and he's the one who placed flowers right in front of the mirror. Now, this is of course a recurring motif that Juliet is aware of, given she too was given a message to double the flowers in front of the mirror. Now it makes sense for her, as she realises the mirrors are being used to conceal cameras. Juliet lowers her voice to a whisper as Gloria points out that there's something in the vents. Juliet, having realised that the mirror holds a hidden camera inside, blocks it off with a cloth and decides to search. Juliet is shocked to find a bag holding the missing hard drive Juliet was looking for and realises she needs to go. Just as the raiders, an armed militia at Sims' beck and call, burst into the room, the episode comes to a shocking close. Episode 8 of Silo begins in the past with Hannah walking through to meet Mosley down in the cornfields. She's with a young Juliet and the pair make a trade. He hands over a box, but in doing so is quick to point out that a silo always wins. It turns out there's a rabbit inside, and on the way back to their home, Hannah tells her daughter they're not going to eat it, as it will be part of a larger experiment. In the present, Juliet evades capture, hiding in the nursery while Sims shows to see Gloria. He notices the vents have been opened and he wants answers. Given she was unresponsive with the guards, he hopes she's going to be answering his questions instead. He wants her help and promises she won't be kept from her dreams if she does, and all he needs to know is what's inside the vent. She mentions a bag, but the contents of which are still unknown, so Sims has her medicated and kept under strict surveillance while he heads out, determined to find Juliet. Juliet is still in the nursery and boots up the computer, trying in vain to access the hard drive. That's denied though, and she ends up sleeping on the floor too. She's awoken by an alert from Billings, and rushing back to the office, she finds a whole bunch of guards turning the place inside out. They're on the hunt for unregistered relics. Juliet is not alien to these searches, of course, given she experienced this with her parents as guards showed up off the back of that earlier trade, demanding she hand over a relic, coming in the form of a magnifier. Juliet's father convinces Hannah to hand over the relic, and after assembling it, she's forced to watch it be completely destroyed. The judicial department also wants the rabbit, but they lie and claim they've eaten it. This also sows the seeds of doubt between Juliet and Pete too, despite the latter claiming he never actually ratted his wife out to the authorities. Now back in the present, Juliet believes Sims is the one calling the shots, and the judge is just a puppet, a fake figurehead to draw the attention away from the head of security. Given the search inside the office is actually illegal, Juliet decides to play them at their own game, and alongside Billings, the pair head to Judicial to stake their case. In fact, Sims is arrested for organising an illegal search, and Sims is surprised but comes willingly, although he is quick to point out that she's only in charge for now and that Juliet will regret her actions. Left alone in Judicial, Juliet starts rooting through all the files, determined to find something that incriminates Sims, and she seems to find it too in a file tucked away in the filing cabinet at the back. A whole bunch of files, which includes one on her mother, Hannah. Juliet heads down to see Pete, wanting to know what really happened to her mum. Pete admits that he regrets shrinking into himself after they lost Juliet's brother, and as for Hannah, her grief pushed her outward and made her bolder and more determined to find the truth. She started crossing lines and Pete tried to help her, and he regrets not doing more to stop the agents and crushing Hannah's spirit the day of the Magnifier relic incident, which happened to be the turning point. At this point, Pete gave up and failed her. Juliet points out that there are cameras in all the mirrors, which is how she knows now Pete wasn't lying when he said he never ratted Hannah out to Judicial. The pair hug it out, but they're interrupted by an order from maintenance who want to check the vents. This is the first time either of them have heard about this, so Juliet shows off the hard drive to her father and decides she's going to take it to Walk. If anyone can get around the encryption here, it's going to be Martha. Unfortunately, there's a whole bunch of bag searches at different checkpoints on the stairs, which only makes things all the harder for Juliet to smuggle the relic around. Sims is still behind bars, although the officers are torn between doing his bidding and following Juliet. In the end, they're stuck in a sort of limbo. Something is clearly not right though, and Juliet brings Lucas in so they can talk. She turns on the taps and points out the hard drive. There's something here that links to SISOP, which seems to only be accessed from her work computer, and it can't be done from where they are. Lucas doubts everything, until Juliet smashes a mirror and shows off the camera behind. She wants his help, but Lucas refuses, pointing out that he won't compromise his mother. She leaves just in time, as Judicial show up and demand she come with them. Juliet is stopped on the stairs by a simple bag check, but she manages to stall long enough for Bernard to arrive. He vouches for her, and the pair head down to the crop field. Bernard wants to know what Juliet has, and unfortunately it's all one big setup, as it turns out it's not Sims in charge after all, it's definitely Bernard. Sims has been the puppet pulling the strings of another puppet, and they know about the hard drive too. The needs of the many require the sacrifices of the few, Bernard says nonchalantly, as he claims the silo is a threat to everyone. Juliet tries to flee, but it's no good. There's too many guards. They take a bag, but on the way up the stairs, Billings arrives. Juliet pleads with him to listen, and he's torn between both sides. Sims punches Juliet in the stomach for her efforts, and she doubles over. When she notices Billings' arm shaking, she finds an opening, wrestles free from his grip, and jumps over the edge of the stairwell. Episode 9 of Silo starts with Juliet tumbling down off the edge of the stairs and landing not far down on a pathway leading out into another area of the silo. She's gone, but Sims believes Paul Billings has let her go and casts his doubts on the deputy sheriff. Bernard is not happy either when he finds out, reprimanding Sims. As for Paul, he heads back home and cradles his arm, lamenting that he lost his grip. Despite taking all these medicines and herbs, his partner, Kat, believes Paul should speak up and admit he has the syndrome. She wants him back in Judicial, but Paul has a duty to this position and doesn't want to give it up so quickly. Furthermore, should Paul actually come clean and admit the truth, they'll know that he lied to get the sheriff position and they could send him out to clean. To remedy that, Paul decides to make things right, determined to catch Juliet. As Sims does the rounds, sending various raiders around to different levels to those who know Juliet. Sims visits Pete in person, but he feigns ignorance and claims he knows nothing. And out of all the places that Juliet ends up, she's actually in Sims' apartment. Juliet blindsides Robert's partner, holding her up at gunpoint and urging her not to speak and handcuffing her to the kitchen. Juliet heads over and uses the computer here, checking the contents of the hard drive. As the percentage slowly ticks up, Paul heads to Juliet's apartment, which is currently being turned inside out by raiders. He also has no clearance to go in there, given his role as deputy sheriff is being usurped for the good of the silo. Instead, he's told to leave. Paul decides to wait for the raiders to leave round the corner before sneaking in himself, going against silo orders and starting to believe something is not quite right here. He looks everywhere, and after removing the seal on the bathroom cabinet, takes it off and finds the Amazing Adventures book hidden behind. Paul looks through the pages and is shocked by what he finds. While this is going on, Bernard decides to question Lucas about his role in all this and what he's hiding with Juliet. He reveals a number, 18, and as a result he's locked up. As for Juliet, she manages to get into the hard drive using the code library and sifting through the files. As she does, Sims and Bernard manage to track down the hard drive, which they know is in Robert Sims' apartment. Robert's partner manages to bust herself out of the cuffs, given she has a key in her pocket, and urges Juliet that she needs to think about what she's doing. Should she decide to stay, they're going to kill her. So interestingly, she lets Juliet run away. Juliet manages to get past security again, thanks to Patrick hacking the cameras and helping her slip into his house. She makes it to his apartment, and with the help of another IT technician, who reroutes the drive so it shows that it's flashing up on a completely different level, manages to hack in and check the files. That video of George Wilkins is certainly revealing, as he admits that he transferred to mechanical specifically so he could find someone to use as a guide. That person happens to be Juliet. However, he didn't account for falling in love with her, and he laments his own feelings. George though tells Juliet that he's found a 15-foot door of metal and she has to find it. While this is going on, Paul burns a book he found in the oven, but not before ripping a single page out for himself to keep, folding it up and placing it in his pocket. As he heads back to the sheriff's office, holding the paper and contemplating his next move, we cut back to Juliet once more, who learns that the clues she's looking for happen to be on a file labelled Jane Carmody Cleaning. When she plays the video, it shows the outside world, the cam footage from our first cleaner, whom we followed at the start of the series. Is this really the truth, or another veiled lie? Episode 10 of Silo Season 1 begins with Juliet watching that video of the outside and believing they should broadcast what they found across every monitor in the silo. The only way to do this though is to amplify the signal through IT. But with security on every floor looking for Juliet, it seems like a suicide mission. Knowing that it will be traced back to their apartment, the trio are forced to descend together to avoid detection. While all the raiders head up to floor 22, the trio are forced to head through the trash chute to evade the raiders. Sims receives a message about Billings heading into Juliet's apartment, so inevitably his frustration is vented onto the deputy sheriff. While being questioned, Billings lies and claims he didn't find anything suspicious, even with Sims taking his anger out on the poor chair in the room. In the heat of the moment, he does notice Paul's shaky hand and questions him over it. The trio of runaways make it down to 126, but Bernard very quickly finds them on the cameras. However, it's too late, as Juliet hooks up the hard drive and manages to link it to all the different screens in the silo. And just like that, the monitors show up with the outside world, showing the beautiful green scenery. Bernard shuts down and restarts the entire server to avoid any of this getting out. Juliet heads the opposite direction to the duo, while Bernard warns all his workers that they need to unsee what they've all seen. The level is completely shut down, and the raiders are sure they'll get her. Bernard realises Juliet is in the trash chute and moving up and down. Unfortunately, they decide to start throwing down heavy debris to flush her out. Thankfully, she's hauled to safety before she's flattened like a pancake. The Judicial show up soon after, but just before they come busting in, Juliet is granted a minute alone with Martha. We don't see what they've spoken about right now, but we do get hints of this later on in the episode. Sims and Bernard bust in and apprehend her, with the latter smashing the hard drive into pieces. He's also going to shackle Juliet to take her out, mostly for show to the other silo members. However, he has a deal for her first. If Juliet waives her right to a judicial hearing and agrees to go outside the clean, he'll spare all her friends and won't punish them. With little other choice, she agrees to the terms, and in fact Bernard even agrees to show her what happened to George if she plays ball. While Juliet is led through the silo, Martha takes a step outside her workshop for the first time in 25 years. As she does, she visits Carla over on the supply level. They discuss the heat tape debacle in the past, which links into the end of this episode in a rather neat way. Anyway, back with Juliet for now. She's brought into security to see all the monitors for herself. Bernard knows this is a breach of protocol and tells the other workers as much when they watch her enter in shock. Before being sent out to clean, she's shown the surveillance footage of George Wilkins from the stairs. George actually stops in front of the cameras and decides to jump in order to hurt the silo and prevent himself from being tortured into revealing crucial information. Doug, the judicial officer, could only stand and watch in shock. Now, after seeing the footage, Juliet is measured for a new suit to wear for her cleaning job. While she's prepped to head outside, Lucas is not sent out to clean, but in fact exiled to the mines for 10 years. Bernard forces him to haul iron ore for the duration of that tenure, and he won't be able to see outside from down there either. Martha has Juliet brought some food while she's in the holding cell, and with cameras watching, Juliet notices there's a note inside and she turns her back to it before reading what's there. Opening the note, she sees that it reads, "You wanted the truth is I love you." Elsewhere, Paul decides to tell Kat the truth about what's going on. He brings up the Sims knows he has the syndrome, but he's not fired, nor do they need to move either. The mayor and the judicial are going to grant him an exemption. However, he doesn't seem too happy about it, and we'll have to wait and see what he's told them, if anything. Juliet shuns his excuses, as Bernard likens the issues in this first season as adjustments. The attention then turns to the outside, where Bernard claims that the founders left them many mysteries. But he doesn't disclose anything in particular, except more cryptic messaging. He does reveal that there's a huge crowd, bigger than any before, to watch Juliet head outside to clean. And in his last act, Bernard hands over Halston's badge, including the word truth engraved on it. Now in the mess hall, everyone watches, ready for Juliet to head outside. And in fact, joining the others is Martha, who heads up to see Juliet go. Bernard reads the final words to her and watches as Juliet heads outside. Now in the mess hall, it shows Juliet heading towards the tree in the distance, but for Juliet she sees the display, but it's all a lie. It's the exact same video from before, complete with the birds flying overhead. This is actually a pre-recorded video from another time. Instead of cleaning, Juliet drops the cloth and decides to walk away, and then it happens. Juliet seems to hit another area, which fizzles the screen in and out like a hologram. She places a sheriff badge down on Halston's body nearby, which happens to be outside the perimeter, and decides not to go any further. That is until Juliet remembers Martha's note and the words "they're good in supply." This links back to the suit, which is absolutely airtight and without gaps as the other suits appear to have had. This also explains Halston. He realised that the visor was engineered, explaining his search for the truth, and removing his helmet he saw the world for what it really was. Unfortunately, with the air poisoned around him, he collapsed and died. Juliet's version of events outside though is very different to that. Bernard realises something is up and grabs a key labelled 18 and waits for the lights to turn on. As for Juliet, she moves further forward and sees the world for what it really is beyond the holographic area. It's not the beautiful area we assumed, but instead a horrific wasteland. With no other home to move back to, Juliet walks up and over the hill, disappearing from view. But we're not done for shockers just yet. As it turns out, our silo is not the only one out here. There are numerous others stretching as far as the eye can see. This would lead us to believe that Bernard's key with 18 written on the side would mean they're in the 18th silo, out of who knows however many others there are. And that brings season 1 of Silo to a close. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.